So it's really important, which I emphasize throughout the semester, that you be taking notes. Because that's how you get interesting stuff. You listen for the interesting stuff, you write it down, now you have the notes to create your stories with. I typically explain, at least in a class where news writing is more emphasized in the sense of more of the daily discussion, that to write a good news story, you need the bricks. You need all the elements you need to put it together for a good news story. And so I kind of say that's kind of your bricks and mortar for building a house. So if you think of your story as a house, you need all those pieces to build your house. If you don't have good bricks, you don't build a good house. And so the good bricks, in the case of news writing, is the quotes and the information you gather. And from a news perspective, it is this interesting? And that's also another reason why I emphasize it, is that it also ends up being the stuff that you will probably consider most relevant, that you'll most likely remember beyond this class. And so if you're taking notes of the stuff that you find interesting, almost by definition, that means that's the stuff you're most likely to remember. And so I want you to remember it. And taking notes helps you remember the stuff you find most interesting, which is typically most relevant to you. So that's been one of the biggest problems, is that a lot of you didn't have good bricks to build your stories with. And when I'm grading, when 50% of the grade is content and you don't have good bricks, then you have a house about ready to fall down. It's not standing very well. So that was one of the main problems I saw. I mean, there were others. There were quite a few people who had no idea what they were doing, to such a degree that I think they did not ever read the evaluation sheet. They did not understand that. They never read the model or the sample A news story that I provided. They did not listen or did not understand my presentations on it. And what they gave me was basically a class report, just stuff they remember that we did in class that wasn't put into a news story at all. It was just a class report, basically. Then we did this, and then we did this, and then Dr. Harvey said this, and then we did that, which is not a news story. So those are the main problems. And so after this presentation, we will go over it one more time, because it's so important to your grade. If you don't, here we are towards the end of the semester, and you may still not have any bricks to build your story with. And it's kind of late to get bricks now. However, except that you have Moodle, and on Moodle is a video for every week. And there's the bricks. And so some of you may have to go back and listen to some of the videos to get your bricks. You can't just make it up. Some of you are making up quotes. That's, first off, made up quotes also tend to be kind of boring because they're not really natural. And anyway, they're not. I have to penalize them if I know for sure, or if I have a really strong feeling that you use a bunch of made-up quotes, and it becomes pretty obvious if they're quotes that are attributed to me, and I'm pretty sure I didn't say that, and especially in that bad grammar, I didn't say that. I may have bad grammar, but even if I do have bad grammar, by the way, if you use a quote of mine and you're absolutely correct and it's bad grammar, you should correct it. As the reporter, you should correct bad grammar. In that sense, you purposely do not report accurately. And that is a standard, that the only time you report with bad grammar is if you're actually targeting the person and you're trying to make them look stupid. They did a lot of that with George Bush, the latest George Bush. They did a lot of targeting to make him look stupid. And so they did quote him exactly what he was saying as he talked. And that is really also biased reporting, by the way. I mean, you're trying to make somebody look stupid by actually quoting them accurately when you're not quoting other people accurately, because we all speak with bad grammar. And so you can make us all sound stupid if you wanted to. And so if the only person that has bad grammar in the world happens to be the President of the United States, you have to suspect their reporting, that they have some bias in their reporting. So you actually correct grammar if there is bad grammar in a quote. Because you still need to make it make sense to your readers. You don't want to torture your readers with bad grammar, even if it's not your bad grammar. Even if it really is accurate bad grammar of the speaker. You don't want to torture your readers with that. And so if that's the worst thing you do is correct their grammar, that quote is a good quote. That's what we would do. Beyond that, if you have failed to understand the essence of what they were trying to say, then that's a you problem. And by the way, even taking an accurate quote and correcting the grammar out of context to where it wasn't what the person intended to say, and if you listen to the entire speech, you would understand what he intended to say, then that's also bad reporting. In some cases, again, reflection of biases or perhaps reflection of just bad reporting. But you see quite a bit of that somebody will take somebody out of context, and that's the sort of thing that a propagandist would do. It's accurate, but it's out of context, and you're just trying to make them look bad by taking one sentence out of a speech and say, ha, see what he said? You know, you're trying to make somebody sound racist, you're trying to make somebody sound stupid, you're trying to make somebody sound, oh, this is their bad idea, and they have this one sentence in a whole speech that was not well thought out, not well written. And you're trying to condemn them with one sentence out of their speech. That's poor reporting also. So, anyway, so those are some of the things that I look at. You have to understand, I'm looking at this as a very seasoned editor that has to edit the stories of professional writers on a consistent basis. I can't see it any other way. And so a professional editor is thinking of one thing, or one main thing. Their main focus is, how will this story fly with the public? When the public reads this story, will they understand it? Will they enjoy it? Will they think it's stupid? Will they not understand it? Will they be bored by it? Those are all related questions, because your job depends on you writing stories that the public likes, which hopefully also makes them true and also makes them important and also makes them other things. But we want the public to like our stories because, again, why do advertisers buy their advertising? For our audience. If we don't have good audience, we don't have good advertising. Our company goes broke if we don't do a good job of writing and reporting. We just go broke. If we write boring stories, I mentioned, I think in my very first news assignment, right out of school, my professor recommended me for this job as editor. I actually started as a reporter for about 5 months before they made me the editor. But I recognized that I had a lot of competent reporters who were boring reporters. They were not the stuff that we get people to pick up our newspaper. And so my job, I saw myself as being the person to make our newspaper interesting, because our other reporters that they had already hired before I got there weren't doing it. They were just writing boring stuff. And so I had to write interesting stuff to compensate for their boring stuff. It was all accurate. I didn't have to do a lot of editing necessarily of their stuff when I was the editor. But boring is boring. And that's a detriment to any newspaper or any news medium. You have to entertain, if you could, maybe that's too strong a use of that word, but you have to make it pleasing to your audience, or you have no product. You have no product. You're going broke. And that's exactly why I walked away from that job. As I talked about before, I think I walked away from that job, gave them 3 months notice and left, because they had decided to systematically write boring stuff. They had decided, because of the influence of the general manager's friends, that we were too controversial and they were going to write boring stuff from now on. And I said, I'm not going to stay for the death of the newspaper. I'm leaving. You are absolutely wrong in your analysis of what our problem is with this newspaper. It's not starting with controversial stories. That's the least of our problems. And within 3 or 4 months, I happened to be friends of the person they finally did hire. He was somebody who went to school with me, university with me also, from the same university, and he's a good journalist. Anyway, when he took my place, after about 3 or 4 months, they lost all their readership. They realized they were losing their advertising at the same time. And so after only 3 or 4 months of trying it their way, they tried to come back to my way with a different editor. And they went tabloid, by the way. We were broadsheet. They decided, well, let's go tabloid. We're going to make it more interesting. We're going to try to save ourselves. They survived for another year or so before they had to sell out. They just had made too many mistakes. I think I mentioned they lied about their circulation. That killed some of their advertising, and now they're purposely making their newspaper boring. That you don't do that. That's stupid. So they had plenty of problems to wrestle with anyway, but their last problem was trying to, having somebody convince them that boring was good. I don't know how in the world they thought boring was good in a newspaper, but that's basically what the general manager decided. Let's make this boring so we're not controversial. And they end up having to sell out to somebody else. So that's your worst enemy in a professional setting, is being boring. And it may be bad writing in some cases, but usually if you're boring, professional writers are good enough writers that that's not the main problem. It's that they don't have good subject material. They're not gathering good subject material. And so gathering the quotes, gathering the information, trying to figure out what is interesting to the readers. And again, what I'm trying to emphasize as I respond to your stories, I'm down to the last dozen or so stories to grade, is that you need to be thinking like a real reporter. That's what I want you to do with this assignment, is think like a real reporter. And that you're writing this for an audience that's not in this room. That's what the editor is going to be thinking about. A good editor, anyway, is not thinking about the audience in the room. They're thinking about the audience outside the room. And so they don't care how pleasing the story is to other reporters, which in essence you are all reporters for this non-newspaper. And so we don't care how much anybody else in this room likes it. We care about what the people outside. Now, obviously, this is not really going outside. But as a professional editor, that's in my mind. What if somebody outside this room read this story? Would it put them to sleep? Would it make them gag? What would be their response to this story? And so that's basically how I'm grading it. Just like I would if you were my reporter at a newspaper, and some of these stories came to me, I would start over again. You have nothing here that's newsworthy, nothing here that's interesting. Newsworthy is interesting content. That's what news is. Essentially, by definition, news is interesting stuff going on. And so if you're not writing interesting stuff, you're not writing news. You're, like I say, maybe you're writing a class report, not interesting. You're writing, you've gotten used to writing stuff from a non-news perspective. So I'm having to kind of break you from some bad habits because you're used to writing to your instructor. And while in a sense that's what you're doing, this instructor isn't thinking like a normal instructor. This instructor is thinking like an editor. And so if you write like you write to a normal instructor, that's not a good thing with me. Not a good thing at all. Because I'm asking you to write as if you're writing to the audience out there someplace. People who are not in this class, who are not trying to kiss up to you, not trying to win your favor, not trying to, my nice student wrote this nice story, and they use nice quotes from me. They made them up, but they're nice quotes about me. Oh, isn't that nice? No. You can say all the nice things you want to about me in your story. It's not going to get you points. In fact, it will take points away from you because it's biased reporting if you're writing nice things about me. So I don't want to hear nice things about me. That's write stuff that's interesting to somebody outside. So hopefully you're kind of getting the idea. This first report is only 8 points, and nobody got less than 55%. No matter how badly you did, I didn't give anybody less than 55%. So the most anybody lost was less than 4 points. The most anybody lost. So that's not going to kill anybody. But that means you need to learn from this assignment before you hand in your assignment a week from today. And so that's why it's important that you watch the videos, you think about what I'm talking about, what I'm explaining to you. If you have to, go back to the critique sheet, go through it carefully, go back to the model story, the sample A story. I also had posted right before the last assignment was handed in, I posted some other samples from a previous class. And I had graded those already. So I showed you what an A paper looked like. I showed you what a B paper looked like. I showed you what a C paper looked like. In those postings back in about a week before you handed in this assignment. And again, I have to think that some people didn't bother to look at those either, because what they handed me was definitely kind of, I'm not sure I showed anything that bad in my samples that week. Because what I say, the ones that are actually have no news orientation, I don't even know what to say about them, except this isn't what I asked for. So it's even kind of hard to start, because it's kind of like, I need to give you like 2 hours of instruction on this so you understand what your assignment is. But that's also what I already did, and definitely what I did in these videos that I created this week. So if you're in the category you wrote something that wasn't news at all, definitely pay very close attention to the videos I made on Monday while you guys were enjoying New Year's Day. I was making those videos so that you could hopefully be better prepared for this assignment for next week. And especially, that's still, again, only 8 points, 8 percentage points of the total class. So obviously the big one is the 40-pointer coming up, your final paper, which is basically these two papers put together and rewritten and improved. And so the final paper should not, if you've done a good job with these two papers, the final paper should not be hard. If you haven't done a good job with the first two papers, then you have quite a bit of work to rewrite them and make them better. And I actually was kind of amazed last semester. My students knew that. I said just what I just said. And I'm kind of thinking maybe some of them paid somebody to help them. And that person they paid had no idea how to do this. Because what they gave me it was definitely not, they again, went to friendly, they were doing news reporting. They gave me a final paper, it wasn't news reporting. It was nice writing and not news reporting. And so, like I said, the only thing I could figure out was they got somebody else to help them with it who didn't know how to write news. So they hired the wrong person to help them. Because I had to give them a worse grade than if they had done it themselves. Because they totally went off of their bad news writing, which, yeah, admittedly, those who did this maybe typically had bad news writing, but it was news writing. And they handed me something that only somebody totally ignorant about what we were trying to do in class would have written, which, again, suggested they hired somebody to help them. That's not a good idea either, because you're not going to find somebody, unless you go find a professional reporter, and a good professional reporter. He's not going to be able to help you in this class. He's going to do worse than you would, because I'm overlooking a lot of your spelling and grammar mistakes. It's the content that I'm interested in, and if you were to hire somebody to try to get retrospectively say, oh, yeah, all this stuff here, they're not going to take the time to figure out how to write this assignment. And so the last thing you want to do with this assignment is to hire somebody to help you, because they're not capable of doing it. Which is another reason why I do some things I do, is that it makes it very hard for people to cheat. Because that means whoever you hire has to, if they're not just editing your stuff, they need to come sit in class and gather their own notes to do a good job. And so you're probably not going to pay somebody enough money to have them come in class and take notes for you also. So it's a little more challenging trying to cheat in a class where the final product is very different than in any other of your classes, basically. So, okay. We'll go ahead in a second with this. Let me just make a couple of quick comments on the subject of media and government. And let me explain one of the biggest problems. Right now, we're going through a process of helping some of the bachelor students prepare for their thesis that you all have to write. I'm not in favor of bachelor theses because I'd rather have you do professional writing than academic writing at this point, because I want you to be ready to go out in the real world, and your thesis probably won't help you do that. And so I'm opposed to bachelor theses. Nonetheless, I'm having to sit in and help grade the bachelor theses proposals and stuff. I would rather, well, in Kazakhstan at my former university, I was lobbying for professionally oriented theses. In other words, don't do it by APA style, do it by journalism style, and write in-depth stories. So, show us that really, in your thesis, really how to do an expert job, something that could be published in a newspaper, not in an academic journal. Because you're not going from your bachelor's degree to become a professor. That's not going to happen. So you can wait on your thesis till your master's degree. But anyway, certain governments, for some reason, not in America typically, but in other countries, think that it's a good thing to make people write theses as a bachelor students. So anyway, what I was going to say, though, is that I'm seeing, even though it's academic and not journalistic, I'm seeing, what's interesting is seeing the misunderstanding of news media and how news media work around the world. For example, one of the groups cited a published academic journal that concluded that America was conspiring to give China a bad brand, to hurt their brand. And of course, what they were saying, and they were talking about the news media, that somehow the news media was conspiring to give them a bad brand. Well, the person who wrote that had no idea how the news media works in America. Who's getting the worst brand in America from the news media? Donald Trump. They're attacking 90% of the stories they're writing about Donald Trump are negative. They're trying to get rid of Donald Trump. And so if the government controlled the news media in America, would that happen? Of course not. And before him, they kissed up to Obama, because Obama kind of thought like they thought, and they destroyed Bush. And so you can pretty much figure out who they're going to write bad stories about. They're going to write bad stories about the Republicans. And they're going to overlook the problems of the Democrats. They're not serious to them. No matter what they do, it's not a problem to them. Because they're seeing it from a common perspective. The people they're trying to protect think like they think. And so they kind of, well, he may be wrong a little bit, but, he's a nice guy and we agree with each other. And so they're protecting people in really bad scandals. They protected Obama time after time after time with scandals that they should have been pursuing. And same with Hillary. They just did not want to offend the people they liked, basically. Whereas in comes Trump, and 90% of the stories have been negative. I'm not saying he's a perfect president by any means. I think he needs to shut up about half the time, or 3/4 of the time maybe. Just shut up, and he'll be fine. But they're clearly out to get him. And as I've said before, they actually have a vested interest to get rid of him, because he's anti-news media. They're about to go broke. They're like drowning people. They're drowning, and they think that they can survive by pushing him down and pushing themselves up. Now they're wrong. They're still going to be destroyed. They're still going to go broke. And no matter what happens to Trump, they're going broke. But in their ignorance, they think that they can survive by pushing him down and kind of holding themselves up a little bit by pushing him down. Whereas they should be going after Facebook and Google. They're going after Trump. Stupid, stupid, stupid from a economic perspective. They have other things, more important things to be doing than trying to destroy the president if they're doing it with badly reported stories. I'm not saying they should ignore the news. I'm not saying that at all. But they're just piling on, and a lot of their stuff is being shown to be not true. They go on with badly supported data, badly supported stuff, and next thing you know, even the FBI is admitting, well, we don't really have any evidence from the dossier, that we can't verify anything from the dossier that the Russians provided, basically. So, they're floundering. They spend a whole year on this dossier material, and they don't have anything in it. And what else? They've ignored the economics. The economics in America are flying sky high, doing a lot better. They're ignoring the reduction in crime. They're ignoring the reduction in illegal immigrants crossing the border. They're ignoring all sorts of stuff. But they're going to go out and get Donald Trump, no matter what good things he's doing. Doesn't matter. They're out to get him. One of the biggest problems in the relationship between media and the press is if a government exerts its power, and some of the worst power that you'll see in countries that pretend to be democratic and aren't very, is when they have libel laws or invasion of privacy laws that are criminal and not civil. That may seem like a very simple thing, but I'll tell you what that means. So if you write something and you criticize somebody, usually along with a criminal libel law, they give the biggest protection to government officials, the biggest protection. And so if somebody doesn't like what you wrote against them, they say, he libeled me, send him to prison. Well, not too many journalists have to go to prison before you kind of think, maybe I shouldn't be writing but negative things about the government, because they're going to send me to prison. In America, it's a civil law. You can't throw anybody in prison for no matter how badly you treat Trump. Trump can't send you to prison. You can't do it because the laws don't support that. The worst thing you can do is go to court and try to get an economic settlement against you, that you hurt his reputation, therefore you're going to court. But American courts give the least protection to the people with the most fame and that have the biggest impact on our daily lives. And so the last person could ever win a court case for libel is Trump. No matter how much the press, no matter how much anybody lies about him, he cannot win that case. Cannot win it by American law. Whereas if they said those things about me, I could sue them. And in fact, a Russian oligarch is suing them. A Russian banker is suing them for the dossier, claiming that he, said something in the dossier that he didn't say. And so a Russian oligarch is suing in American courts, and I think one is in the British courts. Somebody else is suing in the British courts to try to get money from the American media and against the British ex-spy who put together the dossier and other people, because they're saying we aren't famous people. We're not people that want to be in the news, and you just said that we did this and this and this, and we didn't. And you recklessly made those claims without verifying them. A reckless disregard of the truth is it will get you sued and maybe result in a multi-million-dollar claim against you if you recklessly disregard truth and libel somebody who doesn't want to be in the news, who's not seeking to be in the news. He's not a politician. That's the person who can be protected. But the person who's famous and wanting to be in the news, it's very, very hard for them to get any money. Once in a while, there have been some somewhat recent events where movie stars have sued for invasion of privacy. I think it's more invasion of privacy where they're like, maybe sunbathing topless on a beach, and somebody comes and takes their picture and whatever and puts it in a newspaper. Then they're saying that's invasion of privacy no matter whether I'm famous or not. I did not want you running that picture. And so there have been some famous people who have been able to sue. I think it's more for invasion of privacy than for libel, but it could be for libel too, if it's out of their realm of the fame they're trying to achieve. A famous movie star still has some right to privacy, still has some right to be quoted properly, or for the newspaper to not have a careless disregard for truth. Let me put it that way. And so they have some rights, and they have been able to win some cases. But Donald Trump would have no choice, no chance, So that's very different than a lot of other kind of democracies that use these sorts of things, invasion of privacy and libel laws, to thwart their efforts of true journalists. And that if you don't have free speech, you don't have democracy. The other thing that a lot of countries don't understand, and I would put Kazakhstan in this category, they don't have an appreciation for free speech. They don't have the same understanding that Americans did, because Americans came from countries where they were the minorities. Almost everybody that went to America in the early days were minorities someplace else. Not ethnic minorities necessarily, definitely not racial minorities, but they're minorities religiously in many cases. And so out of England came Quakers. Some of my ancestors were Quakers, and they were being persecuted in England, so they went to America. They weren't part of the Anglican or Church of England, and they were being persecuted there, because in those days the church and the state were intermixed to such a degree, and they still are in many countries, which is why I oppose that. When you start mixing the church and the state, then it gets very confusing as to what is libel, what kind of laws you should pass that are totally favoring one church over another church. Can you talk to anybody about your church? No, you can't talk to anybody. That's against the law. You can't talk to anybody about your church. You have that sort of stuff going on. And so you have a thwarting of free speech. Almost by definition, when one church gains control over the others, even though it's about religion, it ends up, they also maybe have their own mores, their own principles about sex and about what's good taste, what's bad taste, and that becomes part of the laws. And so a church starts almost controlling the government if there's pretty much an official state church. So that happened in England. So my Quaker relatives went to America. It happened in Germany, where the Lutheran Church was in control. So some of my ancestors were killed by the Lutherans, who were supposed to be good Christians, but they persecuted the Anabaptists. Later, some of them were called Mennonites, had other names like that. My mother's family were Mennonites, and so they had to flee Germany and Switzerland for their religious freedom. So those are the sorts of people who showed up in America. So the last thing they wanted when they built the Constitution was a majority to be able to persecute a minority. And so the main point of the Constitution was we have to protect free speech, which means we have to protect the minorities. And they had that common understanding that protecting the minorities was the only way you protected democracy, because the minority can become the majority. And so in a free marketplace of ideas, you have to protect the minorities who could become the majorities in their opinions. Otherwise, you have no free speech, therefore you have no democracy. Now, there's almost no country in the world that approaches it from that perspective except America, which is one reason why, even though America has been kind of the shining light of democracy and kind of has pushed it throughout the world, it's pushed it onto countries that call themselves a democracy, but they don't protect free speech, they don't protect free press, they criminalize libel, they criminalize invasion of privacy, they criminalize a bunch of stuff to try to control the press, and you can't have a true democracy that way. Democracy doesn't work that way, because the democracy is based on a free marketplace of ideas. And so when you look at the struggling democracies around the world, it's almost always because they're not protecting the minorities. They're protecting somebody's majority. And they're trying to make sure that majority stays in power. So it may be reflected in a one-party system. It may be reflected in it usually does have a one-party system. There's nothing, by the way, a one-party system can be effective, but usually the only reason why a one-party system exists is because they're thwarting free speech. And so it's more symbolic. Within a one-party, you can have a lot of argument and debate, and so a one-party system theoretically can work fine, because not everybody in that one party agrees with each other. For example, I know there's a lot of misunderstanding. He's not a perfect president by any means, but President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan is their one and only president they've ever had. He was a Communist Party leader before Kazakhstan gained its independence, and he's been the president ever since. He actually has done some very progressive things. Besides stealing billions of dollars from the country, besides that, he's done some really progressive things. More so than other people in his own party. And other people in his own party have thwarted many of the progressive things he's tried to do. And so when I talk to Americans about Kazakhstan are about the dictator. They all want to call Nazarbayev a dictator, and that is absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. Because he can't control his own party. His own party is always doing more dictatorial things around him than he is himself. He actually does believe in democracy, and he actually is trying to get more freedom of ideas into the country, even though, like I say, his country, his family has profited in the billions of dollars in mostly illegal ways. And many of his buddies are budding billionaires as well because they're his friends. He nevertheless has been trying to do a lot of progressive things in that country. So he's an example of a one-party system where Americans call him a dictator and they absolutely have no idea. That's just absolutely not true. He can't control his own party. And they are actually the people in his party are more hardline or more dictatorial than he is. And he's trying to stop them, and he can't. Because he's just one person in a one-party, basically one-party system. Even though he's president. He's not such a dictator that he can control his own party. So a one-party system could work in theory, but a one-party system usually only exists because there's lack of freedom of speech. Otherwise, there would be other parties that would be vying for power, almost by definition. There would be more parties. There might be 20 parties. There would be all sorts of parties because people would want do things their own way. So as you listen to this and we talk about media and government, I hope you can kind of understand that. I think I mentioned before, in talking to my students in Kazakhstan, all their TV news came from Russia. And so when Russia invaded Georgia, about when I first got there in 2008, they thought I was so misled by my suggesting that they should be a little bit critical of the Russian TV news because it's governed by, it's controlled by the government that just did the invasion. And therefore it's not going to be truthful about everything. And it's not quite the same as the Western press because the Western press is not, despite what this academic from China said, the Western press is not controlled by the government. Now, they can be greatly influenced by the government's misreporting of facts. Because if a press relies too much on the government to give them the truth, well, I think WikiLeaks has shown that the government doesn't do that all the time, even in America. And that's one reason why I support WikiLeaks, because our own government doesn't tell the truth. And WikiLeaks has exposed their lies. And so I like WikiLeaks. I would not throw them in prison. I'd give them the Pulitzer Prize because I think what they do is necessary. No matter where they got information, they may have gotten some from Russia. They may have gotten some from other hackers. I don't care. Nobody refuted what they had to say. And so it must have been accurate. Nobody said it was a lie. All they said was, Russians, Russians, Russians. I don't give a darn if the Russians gave them the information. If it's true, as a citizen, when my own government's lying to me, I don't care who gives me the information. If somebody gives me the truth and my government's lying to me. In the democracy, I should not care. And the truth is, most people didn't care, which is why Hillary's not president of the United States, is that people in America cared to know the truth, no matter where it came from. And they did not trust their own government to give them the truth anymore, and they did not trust the mainstream media to give them the truth, which is why the mainstream media is trying to destroy Trump, because he basically exposed them saying they are the fake news. They are slanting the news, and they have their own liberal agenda. And therefore, they're the fake news. Now, so they have to destroy him because he's basically trying to destroy them, is the way they perceive it. So it's an interesting time. Anyway, so in trying to explain to my students the difference, the American media is going to be somewhat controlled by maybe lack of true information, and they're going to be controlled by their biases. Understand that. They have biases, and they only can report what they know. And if nobody's giving them the truth, then you're right. It will be somewhat controlled. But nobody's telling them what to write. Least of all in that era, Bush. Nobody was telling them what to write. Of course, the invasion in the Ukraine happened during Obama. And they were kind of kissing up to Obama. That's true. and they weren't investigating Obama's administration very well. That's true. But nonetheless, Obama did not control them directly. He maybe influenced them during that. But now the stuff going on in Ukraine is still going on. From what I understand, at least the government saying that Russian troops are right in Ukraine, training and working alongside the rebels in the Ukraine. And that could come up with a new crisis. But as we approach that crisis, people still need to understand, if they're getting their news from the Russian TV stations, they're getting basically PR. They're getting propaganda, direct propaganda. If they're getting the news from the Western press, they're getting biased reporting. Absolutely. So you need to understand where the new information is coming from in order to properly understand it, and to suggest that the Western press is part of a conspiracy to give China a bad brand, for example, not true. Ignorance, bias, lots of things play into their bad reporting. The fact that they're catering to the American, they're not writing to the Chinese, they're writing to the Americans, and they are catering to the American biases, that's true. Lots of things that makes their reporting bad, but it's not a conspiracy on the part of the government. That makes no sense when 90% of the press against Trump. In fact, I made in this meeting that we had, I made the comment, if there's agenda, if there's a conspiracy against anybody, it's much more against Trump than it is against China in the American press. China gets much better press than President Trump does on average. So it's anyway. I don't think there's a conspiracy against him either. Not a formalized conspiracy where everybody got together. Okay, New York Times, you're going to do this, and Washington Post, you're going to do that. We're going to destroy President Trump. I don't believe there's that sort of conspiracy against President Trump. You have biases, liberal biases of the press, and you have a press that is desperate to survive, and they're going to write negative things against President Trump because he represents a different ideology, and he represents a threat to them. And that's why they're going to attack him and attack him and attack him and try to find anything they can to destroy him. And that's the way it is. But I don't think they're meeting in a back room to coordinate their attacks. I don't think that's happening at all. Having been part of the press, I have never seen any hint of anything like that ever happening. I just don't believe it is. Okay. You guys want to come up and make your presentation? Are you still a Lone Ranger, or do you have Tonto with you? Okay. Who's first? Is this the right order? Okay, whatever. That's fine. So who's up first? You're first? Okay. But the list of the names is correct in the front page? Mm-hmm. Who's going first and second? They're in the right order? I don't want to grade you wrong.
Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Chen Pingrui. Today we will talk about media and the government, and this is my partner Han Shuwei. First we will introduce this topic: government regulation of media. Throughout the 20th century, three important U.S. regulatory agencies appeared. They are FTC, FRC, and FCC. FTC means Federal Trade Commission, which founded on September 26, 1940, and is designed to prevent unfair methods of competition in commerce. FRC means Federal Video Commission, which was intended to bring order to the chaotic situation that developed as a result of the breakdown of earlier wireless acts passed during the formative year of wireless radio communication. Last, FCC means Federal Communication Commission. President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Federal Communication Commission in 1934 as part of the New Deal. Next. Actually, the FCC lasted only until 1934, when it was grouped by the FCC. In detail, the FCC contains three major divisions: broadcast, telegraph, and telephone, and the four key bureaus are the Media Bureau and the Wireless Competition Bureau and the Wireless Telecommunication Bureau and the International Bureau. Generally speaking, the FTC primarily dedicated itself to eliminating unfair business practice. One example of the FTC's media regulatory responsibility is the National Do Not Call Register. In order to prevent most telemarketing phone calls, exemption such groups as non-profit, charity, and business with which a consumer has an existing relationship. So, in other words, the nation do not call register gives you a choice about whether to receive telemarketing calls. Next is regulation today. Media deregulation actually began during the 1970s, as the FCC shifts its approach to radio and television regulation. And then, due to this repeat consolidation, Congress grew concerned about the cost of deregulation, and by the late 1980s, it began to slow the FCC's release of control. Some favor deregulation, believing that the public benefits from less governmental control. Others, however, argue the excessive condition consolidation of media ownership threatens the system of checks and balance. Next, we will talk about the law and the mass media message. This is our content of this part. Law and the media, libels, statements, and the libel defenses. Right of policy. First, law and the media. In short, a reporter and there are four main points. The reporter and the editor should know enough about the legal aspects of journalism. The print media needs no license to start publishing. The broadcast media are licensed. Third, the media are not public utilities. They can accept or reject any story, advertisement, picture, or letter. The problem of news management at all levels of government still exists. Next is about libel. Libel is that damage to a person's reputation caused by bringing the people in hatred, contempt, or ridicule in the eyes of a substantial and respectable group. So, here are two things to note. In order to avoid libel, editors should exercise responsibility in accuracy, exactness, and judgment. Even if libel occurs, it should not frighten the staff. Some cases are not so important. Next, in law, there are 4 points to note. Only the person libels can cause an action. Relatives have no result in libel. The suit must be brought within the statutory period. Last is a person who has been libeled can ask to bring a correction. Now let's talk about the libel defenses. There are 5 key words. There are constitutional, truth, privilege, fair comments, and critics, correction, and their impact. Okay. First, since 1974, U.S. Constitution does not require private person involved in public issues to prove actual malice in suits, seeking actual damages for defamation. Truth is an absolute defense to libel. About fair comment and critics, we should know the comment is founded on facts. The comment is not made with intent to damage. The comment doesn't involve the private life or moral character. Last, correction and their impact. The correction should be full and frank, and be displayed or broadcast as clear as the story complained of. Now I will talk about the right of policy. There are four truths. Instruction on the plaintiff's seclusion or solitude or into private affairs. Public disclosure of embarrassing private facts about the plaintiff. Okay. 1.3 censorship and the freedom of speech. Censorship is defined as suppressing or removing anything deemed objectionable. The first amendment states that Congress should make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. However, what many people do not realize is that U.S. law establishes several exceptions to free speech, including defamation, hate speech, breach of the space, incitement to crime, sedition, and obscenity. Now we will talk about violence and sex. Obscene material has the following characteristics: cause the average person to have lustful or sexual thoughts, depict lawfully or offensive sexual conduct, literal, artistical, political, or scientific value. Indecency material has the following characteristics: contain graphic, sexual, or equatory depictions, draw at length on depictions of sexual or equatory organs. It's used simply to shock or arouse an audience. Each year, the FCC receives thousands of complaints. As we can see, the total number of complaint increased from 111 to 233,531. Here I will simply introduce Hays Code, created to forestall what was perceived to be longing governmental control over the industry. The Hays Code was Hollywood self-censorship. Among other requirements, the Hays Code enacts strict guidelines on the portrayal of violence. Prepared by the changing moral standards of the 1915s and the 1916s, this led to a gradual reintroduction of violence and sex into mass media. So we have rating systems. At the beginning, firm rating consists of G, PG, R, and X. Then, the MPP introduced the PG3 rating to indicate that some material may be inappropriate for children under the age of 13. Like Titanic. If you are under 13, you can watch it. Another change came to the rating system in 1919 with the introduction of the NC7 rating. Besides, receiving an NC7 17 rating often leads to a lack of promotion or distribution because numerous movie theaters and rental outlets refuse to carry films with this rating. Last, I will introduce television and the video game rating. These ratings are displayed on screen during the first 15 seconds of a program and include TVY, TVY7, TVY7 FV, TVG, TVPG, TV14, TVMA. If you are interested, you can view this form after class. At about the same time that television rating appeared, the Entertainment Software Rating Board was established to provide rating on video games. Video games rating include EC, E, E10, E, T, M, and AO. include EC, E, E10, T, M, and AO. Even with this rating, the video game industry has long endured question over violence and sex in video games. One of the top-selling video game series in the world, Grand Theft Auto, is highly controversial. And this is a report about video games. But what is interesting is that, despite multiple lawsuits, some video games characters stand by their decisions to play graphic displays of violence and sex in their games on the grounds of freedom of speech. Now I will pass to my partner Han Shiwei. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I will talk about intellectual property issues in the mass media. First, let's find out what intellectual property includes. Intellectual property including copyrights, patents, open license, trademarks, trade secrets, URLs, domain names, and even components of television programs. Intellectual property law generally follows the same guidelines as copyright law and the associated legislation. 6. To encourage innovation and creativity with an ultimate aim of promoting a general benefit of society. Here is a video that can be used to help us better understand what is intellectual property.
Probably have to go to the original. In fact, we're best off. Okay, you're on.
Next, detailed description of some of the internet important content. Online creativity and intellectual property rights. Congress passed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998 to establish a protocol for online copyright matters. The relative ease and convenience of copying and sharing information online has led to rampant piracy violations. The DMCA and its role in internet policing have frustrated many online users and watchdog groups. Copyright protection in cyberspace. In 1996, the World Intellectual Property Organization (WIPO) established two treaties designed to update and supplement the major existing WIPO treaties on copyright and related rights, primarily in order to respond to developments in technology and in the marketplace. WIPO Copyright Treaty (WCT) was created to protect authors of literary and artistic works, including computer programs, original debates, and fine art. WIPO Performance and Phonograms Treaty (WPPT) deals with related rights or rights connected to copyright. The RIAA versus piracy. Widespread piracy problems arose during the late 1990s with the popularization of technology allowing peer-to-peer music sharing. Association of American RIAA put the laws established by the DMCA into practice and began a campaign to stop music piracy. The law and online interactions, terms of service agreements, as well as legislation such as the 1986 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act regulate internet use. Terms of service TOS are legally binding rules that an individual must adhere to in order to use a particular piece of software or service. An individual breach of any TOS may result in suspension, restriction, or cancellation of account privileges depending on the severity of the offense. Online hate crimes and anonymity. The convenience of the network has brought online hate crime. Many people still mistakenly believe that the Internet will protect them from prosecution. Internet is not and should not be treated differently from other communication methods. Something posted online carries the same weight as a phone conversation or face-to-face interaction. Online anonymity is, in fact, not anonymous. The government countries supposedly anonymous posts using IP addresses. 1.5. Digital democracy and its possible effects. The effects is mainly on the following points. Digital democracy, also known as e-democracy, engages citizens in government and civic actions through online tools. Internet is the most effective modern way to engage individuals in politics. This new form of democracy began as an effort to include larger numbers of citizens in the democratic process. Here are some examples of the successful use of digital democracy. First, President Barack Obama has been called the digital candidate for his use of digital technology during his 2008 presidential campaign. Second, Hillary Clinton has a team of software engineers who have built many applications ranging from fundraising to tools that facilitate grassroots supporters voting. It's also the successful use of digital democracy. Political candidates can fight for votes for themselves in the following ways: traditional websites, social networking, email outreach, text messaging, e-democracy. Political rumors online. Although the Internet is a powerful tool for candidates, it also propagates rumors that can derail or at least hinder a politician's career. Blog posts and mass emails can be created within minutes and then reposted or forwarded in seconds. Thus, ideas spread like wildfire, regardless of their relative truth. Digital democracy and the digital divide. On the one hand, digital democracy has provided service to a large number of young voters. Advanced modern technologies have added advantages to their election campaigns. On the other hand, digital democracy also denies poor citizens without digital access an opportunity to be part of the new wave of democracy. 1.6. Media influence on laws and government. Media have long had a voice and a role in politics, so some newspapers and magazines use their pages as a forum for political discourse. In addition to acting as a watchdog, media provide readers and viewers with new coverage of issues and events, and also offer public forums for debate. Thus, media support or lack thereof can have a significant influence on public opinion and governmental action. The media persuade political power along with the rule. The media must carefully navigate when dealing with political issues. Political politics, broadcast media, and the internet. Throughout their respective histories, radio, television, and the internet have played important roles in politics. Radio provided a way to hold these debates in a public forum. It also provided a venue for politicians to speak directly to the public. Television. Political candidates began using television commercials to speak directly to the public as early as 1952. Nixon Kennedy debates of 1960. The debates between presidential candidates gave voters their first chance to see candidates debate, marking television's entry into politics. Just as radio changed the way politicians thought about their speeches, television emphasized the importance of their appearance. War and television. The medium was in its infancy, and its audience and technology were still too limited to play a major role. Early in the war, the coverage was most upbeat. However, television coverage began to change as journalists grew more and more skeptical of the government's claims of progress. And there was more emphasis on the human cost of war. In particular, some brutal war scenes treated the people's anti-war sentiment. Political news programming. For years, nightly news broadcasts dominated the political news cycle. Then, in the 1980s, round-the-clock cable news channels such as CNN have been appeared. The comedic news programs have in recent years become major cultural arbiters and watchdogs of political issues, thanks to the outspoken nature of their hosts and their frank coverage of political issues. Online news and politics. The internet has become an increasingly important force in how Americans receive political information. Additionally, political groups regularly use the internet to organize supporters and influence political issues. Online petitions are available via the internet. The individuals can use online resources to donate to political causes or connect with like-minded people. Media and government have had a long and complicated history. Each influences the other through regulations and news cycles. As technology develops, the relationship between media and politics will likely become even more intermeshed. Now the first question. Which of the following is not a character of intellectual property? Okay. The answer is B. Intellectual property intellectual property process the practice of excellence. Next question. Which of the following ways political candidates can use to communicate with voters? Okay, the answer is E. Third, which of the following statements on the media's influence on the government is incorrect? Okay, the answer is B. Okay.
Okay. Which three major U.S. regulators have emerged throughout the 20th century? Okay, A, C, D. Correct. Thank you. Okay. Number 2. What? A, C, D, E. Okay, last one. Which is not correct about Libel's statements? Just one. It's easy. Okay, answer is B. Relatives have no resource in Libel. Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you.
Okay, we're kind of running out of time. I am going to make another video, even though I suspect nobody will watch it. I will go over a few more of the submissions to maybe explain just a little bit more, but I know you already have 3 hours of explanation, so you probably won't watch this one. Nonetheless, I will do it anyway for my own exercise. But I think, I'm hoping that you get the idea as far as what I'm expecting, and if you're still, I guess the most important thing I need to mention, please pay attention, if you want me to send you your paper marked up, it's not going to be really copy edited, but it'll be like color coded as I showed you. It will be color coded. Send me a request for it, so all I have to do is hit return and send it back to you. So I don't have to be looking up email addresses and stuff. So if you want that, send me an email. I will attach in response and send it to you. Okay? So I'm not going to send it to anybody who doesn't request it. So if you have friends not here and you think they'll want it, tell them to send me an email and I'll send it back to them. I just running out of time. And like I said, trying to look up every email address and send it to you is not feasible. Printing them all out isn't feasible. There's not a good way to do it. Other than what I'm suggesting. So send me an email. I'll send you your color-coded report back again. Just real quick, a couple of other things then related to this subject. Because of the strong belief in free speech and free press, all of these the controls the government has instituted have always been somewhat controversial. And although after a while you start accepting them. For example, we come to accept the FCC's involvement in stuff. But when it was first discussed, do we have, actually starting with the FRC, the Federal Radio Commission, starting with that, there was a clear reason why they had to do it. Not everybody could own a radio station. And it wasn't not for financial reasons, that's true too, but not everybody can own a newspaper for financial reasons. So the reason why it was created was that not everybody could have a frequency in the bandwidth. It was not possible for everybody to have a bandwidth. And in fact, already radios were conflicting with each other and they were overlapping each other in their coverage. And so you could be someplace and you'd hear a radio station from one city and I could say it's kind of far away, but let's say they had high power radio station. You have one on the same frequency at Kuala Lumpur and one in Singapore, and somewhere in between you'd have both of them and be overlapping each other, and you couldn't hear either one of them because the signal from both was too strong. So that's what's going on all the time in America. So it was determined that since it was impossible for everybody to own part of the airwaves, so to speak, nobody could own the airwaves. It had to be controlled by the government had to gain control, had to take control of the airwaves. And so that was a justification for the FRC and the FCC to start with. Come down to today. Interestingly enough, in one of our previous presentations, it was a very biased presentation on net neutrality. Because even you have been influenced by the liberals in America about net neutrality. And there have been statements in the press about the end of the internet as we know it, because Trump's FCC had done away with net neutrality. Here's the facts. First off, net neutrality is only 2 years old. And so if you didn't notice a problem before 2 years ago, you probably won't notice this problem in the future. Net neutrality was an invention of the Obama administration. The Obama administration, which was more controlling of media than any other administration ever. He lied to the press all the time. To control it. He ignored subpoenas by Congress. They were ready to impeach his attorney general before he quit because he was ignoring the subpoenas of Congress. Obama was the most repressive president ever as far as revealing the truth. And yet he wanted to control the internet. So how do you suppose conservatives responded to that? We don't want this government control. I mean, his administration was favoring through the tax laws. They were violating the tax laws by only giving the liberal nonprofit organizations tax exempt status and not giving the conservatives tax exempt status. Violating the law. Nobody went to jail for it, by the way. And one of their computers crashed and they don't have the evidence anymore. They finally confessed, and they've just paid a few $1 million to the conservative groups that they were prejudicially treating in the taxing process. When not only did they lie about Benghazi, but they were giving lie detector tests to anybody in the administration who might tell the truth to Congress. Not just to the press, but even to Congress. They did not want Congress to know the truth. And there were a lot of other things they were repressing and lying about and ignoring subpoenas, legal subpoenas by the Congress. One of the three branches of the government, Congress was sending a legal subpoena, give me this information, and the government was ignoring them. And so that's the government that wanted net neutrality to give them control over the internet in the FCC that they control. And so the conservatives don't want the liberals ever to have control over the internet. They do not trust them. And so so the reason why the Trump FCC has done away with net neutrality is, first off, it was not needed before. There was not a strong case that was ever needed. If you didn't notice a problem 2 years ago, then you won't notice a problem in the future. And in a free market system, if an organization tries to screw with you, what are you going to do? You're going to another organization. So if your ISP provider screws with you and sells your information or does whatever they want to do, you go to another provider and you put them out of business. That's the free market system. And so the conservatives want a free market system. They do not trust government to control that. It was under Reagan that the FCC deregulated radio. Under Obama, there were people who wanted to re-regulate radio. They wanted to make it so that basically if you gave anybody's opinion, I'd give everybody's opinion, basically. Which made it, basically radio could not give any opinions before they deregulated radio. But what happened when they deregulated, okay, here's, again, statistically, this is science, this isn't my opinion. Hollywood is dominated by liberals. Universities in America are dominated by liberals, at least 4-1 at the minimum. Hollywood about 9-1 liberal. Newspapers are dominated about 4-1 liberal. Basically, all the communication instruments in America are controlled by the liberal orientation, aka Democrats. When they deregulated radio, both liberals and conservatives tried to use it for talk radio. The liberals failed. They're essentially, if there's one or two maybe in the world, or at least in America, there's almost no liberal talk radio. Talk radio just means you have a host like Rush Limbaugh, you may have heard of him, who gives an opinion, and he accepts phone calls, and they discuss the news and so forth. The conservatives have been amazingly, people have gotten very rich as conservative commentators and talk show hosts on radio. Liberals have always failed. So why? Why would the liberals fail and the conservatives succeed? It's because radio ended up being the only voice of conservatism. It was the only voice of conservatism. The universities were liberal, TV was liberal, newspapers were liberal, most magazines were liberal, everything, liberal, and the conservatives felt basically persecuted or excluded from the conversation. And so along comes freedom of radio, and which one succeeded? There's a theory called the uses and gratifications theory, that basically people use the media for their own purposes. And that's why conservative talk radio was successful and liberal wasn't, is that the liberal citizens of America didn't feel a need for talk radio. They already had liberal Hollywood, liberal university, liberal newspapers, liberal everything. So they had enough liberal commentaries. They didn't need liberal talk shows. And so there was no successful liberal talk shows. There was no restrictions against it. And some of them tried to make liberal talk shows. They were not successful. They get no listeners and thus no advertising. They were a bust because of the user and gratification theory. Absolutely predicted that. Whereas the conservatives felt excluded from everything, and they rushed in to talk radio. So one of the things happening under the Obama was a lot of Democrats were saying, we need to go re-regulate that radio. We've got conservatives on there giving their opinion. We can't have that. Well, that's again why we don't want a lot of control by the FCC, because you've got with one side that dominates already trying to redominate other areas. They want to dominate the internet. So the conservatives do not trust government, particularly because it will gain, the liberals will gain control again one of these days. We do not trust them to be honest and fair about it, because they've never been honest and fair about it. So we don't want to trust them. So when you hear all this hoopla about net neutrality, it's very easy to fall into it because you're getting media from America and you're getting the liberal perspective on it. Nobody's told you the conservative perspective. We don't trust the liberals to control the FCC. So even though the conservatives control it now, we don't want the FCC to have this, once if net neutrality exists for a long, long time, at first, actually, net neutrality did nothing negative while it was imposed for 2 years. But it's not what happened in 2 years in the past, is what will happen in 2 years or 4 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years in the future if the government takes control of it. We simply don't trust them. And so that's the argument against net neutrality, is the marketplace handles it by itself. And the government cannot be trusted. You can trust ISPs more than you can trust the government. The ISPs will respond to market forces. And if they do something stupid, and what I've talked about Facebook is doing some stupid stuff right now, by the way. They are controlling how much, they're trying to control fake news to some degree. In the process, because they are anti-conservative, and the conservatives are the ones accused of, well, basically what comes, it's not really fake news, but the conservatives have also rushed into social media the same as they rushed into radio. And so it was the conservatives rushing into social media that won the presidency for Trump. And so because the owners of Facebook are liberal, they are now trying to figure out how do we control this to keep the conservatives from overrunning our medium. We own it, and they're overrunning us. How do we control it? And so they're putting in some new rules. You can only post so many times a day and before they cut you off. And I think they may have an algorithm to even prejudice against the conservatives on that. That is going to hurt them. There will probably be, you could almost predict, if they keep that up, they will have a major competitor within the next 5 years or so, which is fine with me. I think they need one. But and market forces will control it. We wouldn't say you should control Facebook either. Even though they're liberal and even though they seem to be trying to control the discussion now, conservatives would not say, do you want that government ought to do something about Facebook because they're trying to control us. No. We don't want anybody. We want market forces to control it. And so that's actually the conservative perspective on most everything. The conservative perspective, that definition in America is less government. So I mentioned before that conservative and liberal has different meaning in different countries. In Kazakhstan, I was a liberal because I wanted less government. And there they had repression of free speech. That's government control. I wanted less government, so therefore I was a liberal in Kazakhstan. In America, I'm a conservative because I want less government. Well, I haven't changed. I still want less government. I want less government in Kazakhstan. I want less government here. I want less government in America. I want less government every place. I want free market. I want free market discussions, free market everything to the degree possible, within reason. And so that's what I am. And depending where I live, I'm a conservative or I'm a liberal by local standards. In America, I'm called a conservative. I want less government. In Kazakhstan, I'm a liberal because I want less government. Same person, same ideology, different label depending where I live. So that's one thing you need to understand about the FCC is it is government control of free speech. And so we don't want those who believe in the Constitution and in free speech most rigorously want as little government control over free speech as possible. And ironically, the conservatives, however, are also the ones who are most anti-pornography. And yet they're willing to accept pornography on the internet if it means government staying out of it. Because if conservatives really wanted to promote their ideology, they'd say more government and let's stop pornography on the internet. That's what conservatives would say if they were pursuing their ideology of content. They are the ones that are anti-pornography. They're people that go to church every week, that, so forth. They're mostly, a lot of them are hardcore Christians, stuff like that. So they're anti-pornography, but because they're afraid of the government, they will not say, let's control pornography on the internet, because that means government will control other stuff too. They don't want government involved in the internet. They see it finally a place where there can be real freedom of speech, not just in America, but other places too. And so you need to understand that. This idea of fake news, that the liberals are created this term fake news, and I'm not going to justify all the news that got thrown around the social media. Some of it was inaccurate, and some of it was poorly reported. However, on the other hand, one of their favorite targets is a website called InfoWars. InfoWars was telling me what happened in Benghazi within 1 month after it happened. Whereas mainstream media did not tell the truth they've never told the truth. They've never really emphasized the truth of Benghazi, ever. Because to do so would have to be a rap on Hillary and Obama, and they won't go after them. There are still elements of Benghazi that are still under dispute. InfoWars said 1 month after Benghazi that there were arms being sent purposely being sent from Libya to Syria, to the rebels in Syria. That's what was happening. Now, just recently, the government admitted that arms were being sent out of the country. But they're kind of hedging on what was going on with those arms. So all the extra, armament that they had provided the rebels in Libya was going someplace, and they're kind of hedging and not really. They don't want to lie. They don't want to tell the truth. Let me put it that way. And so the government is still stalling in that, and the liberal press says nothing about it. But InfoWars may have been wrong on exactly what was happening to those weapons, but within 1 month, they not only told the truth about why the uprising and what led to the death of the Americans in that consulate, but they also knew that weapons were somehow related to it and were being shipped out within 1 month. And the mainstream media has yet to cover that in any substance other than quoting government sources, which all deny anything. They deny everything. So InfoWars is one of their main targets of fake news, and they do a lot of bad reporting. They're not very professional, and they are very biased. And so they find something that they think, aha, we got them, and they send it on the internet immediately, and it turns out sometimes to be false. And sometimes it turns out to be true, and years ahead of the mainstream media. And so fake news is being used by the liberals to try to shut up the conservatives, and especially the unprofessional conservatives. And there is truth to that. But there's also a lot of fake news going around by liberals. You look on the internet and you'll see for example, they come on and they talk about, Obama has stopped deficit spending. Well, they purposely leave that in such a way that they ignore the fact that during his period as president, he doubled the national debt. But because of the conservative Congress, controlled by the Republicans, they lowered their yearly deficit. But it wasn't even him doing. It was the Republican Congress. So you have stuff going around the social media all the time, one side or the other, trying to lay claim to something that they really, that is unrepresentative of the truth. And that's true on both sides. But just like radio, the conservatives are the most active ones in social media because of the same reasons they were active in radio. And it's the same reason why Fox has become the top network. Because it's one network, and it's the only network that conservatives trust at all. Whereas they don't trust any of the other networks. And so, because conservatives make up about half of the country, Fox is doing really well. Because of the uses and gratification theory. Is that the conservatives are going to where they feel comfortable, and it's not with the mainstream media. And so they're flocking to Fox, they're flocking to talk radio, and they're flocking to social media to share their ideas because they feel like they're being excluded by the other media, and by the universities, and by Hollywood, and by the rest of the liberal establishment. So it's that's the reality of the situation. You have this battle going on of ideologies, and the Democrats seem more prone to use government to stop their other side from speaking. Same as at universities. If you may have read that when some conservative speakers show up to university, the students start breaking windows and turning over cars and causing fires and won't let the person come talk. Well, that is very anti-democratic, to not let your opponent talk. And that doesn't ever happen against the liberals, hardly. Well, I don't know of a time in the last 5 years anywhere where the conservatives stopped any liberal from talking. But it happens all the time in university campuses when a conservative wants to come talk. And that is very anti-democratic for Democrats to be doing. But that's the status in America of this battle between ideologies, is the liberals of America want to use more government and use more force to make things their way, and the conservatives want less government. Just leave us alone, get out of our way, let us be free marketers, let us have free speech, and just get out of our way, and everything will be fine. So that's the battle. And so you may get kind of caught in between with the liberal media, net neutrality, end of the world as we know it, because they took down net neutrality. Yeah, if there was an end of the world 2 years ago, maybe, yeah, whatever. I didn't notice any end of the world over the last 10 years before net neutrality. In fact, it's getting better and better and better and better. There's more sources, there's stronger bandwidth. Everything's gotten better on the internet. And doing away with net neutrality will have no negative impact that you'll feel. It might have positive impact by keeping the U.S. government out of the internet, which is the purpose of getting rid of it. Just stay out of it. We don't want you involved. Get out of it. I know we're out of time. Let me see if there's anything else real hot. I kind of covered quite a few things there. I guess one last thing is that actually the U.S. Constitution has been ignored. Its original intent was totally ignored by the Supreme Court, which is problematic. The Supreme Court seems to, if there's a dictatorship in America, it's the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is for life. You get under the Supreme Court, you're there for life, which is one reason why Trump is very quickly putting on as many conservative federal judges as he can. And some of them are not very well qualified, according to the liberals, and they're making a big deal of it. But they are conservative, and conservatives by definition will support the Constitution by its original intent. That's what they do. The Tea Party people are very into supporting the Constitution as the founders intended it to mean. the whole argument when the U.S. Constitution was founded was about how to keep government out of our lives. That was the whole argument. It almost was not passed because the anti-federalists did not. They thought they were giving too much power to the federal government, and the Federalists said, no, we're giving them almost no power. And so you go back to that debate, and it's all about restricting government power, all of it. So when you get to the First Amendment, they miswrote it. Actually, one of the Federalists, one of those who was in favor of the federal government, wrote that you have to be very, very careful about adding any new amendments, because politicians of the future will turn your words upside down. They'll turn your words upside down. You cannot trust the politicians of the future. That's what the Federalists, those in favor of the stronger federal government, said during this debate. And so the conservatives, who wanted less government, one of their First Amendment was, Congress shall not shall not infringe on freedom of press, shall not pass any law related to gatherings or freedom of speech or freedom of press and so forth. That was turned on its head by the Supreme Court, by the dictators of the Supreme Court, because they wanted more power, basically. But what was the intent of the First Amendment? It said Congress. But with the Constitution, there's only one of the three divisions that has the power to pass laws. That's Congress. Therefore, they thought they were writing the right thing when they said Congress shall not. Because there was no reason to say the Supreme Court shall not, because the Supreme Court supposedly had no law-writing ability. And there's no reason to say the executive branch or the president shall not, because the president had no law-making ability, they thought. But in this day and age, the Supreme Court is writing law. By the way they pass their interpretations of the Constitution, they in essence are writing laws. And the executive branch, through regulations, is writing laws. And so their use of the word Congress was their mistake. Because even at that time, there were already libel laws and privacy laws and obscenity laws already in the states. And they had no intention of telling the states you can't have those laws. No intention. But then because they said Congress and they didn't say anything else, the Supreme Court decided that Congress meant that nobody could write laws. Nobody could write laws about pornography and obscenity and so forth. And that's exactly the opposite of what the founders were saying. The founders were saying exactly what they said through the rest of the first 10 amendments, which is federal government, stay out of this business. You have no right to be talking about any control over any communications. You're out of this. No federal government involvement. That's what they were saying. But the Supreme Court flipped it on its head, and it took the power away from the states. If they had gone by the real historic intention of the First Amendment, then one state might have strong anti-pornography laws, another one might have very liberal laws, one might have a strong libel law, one might have a liberal libel law, because the intention was to give that power among many, many others to the states and have no federal involvement whatsoever, which is what the Supreme Court flipped on its head and took federal control over that issue. So that's one total misinterpretation, exactly actually what the Federalists, those in favor of a strong government, warned against, that you put too many words here, somebody's got to figure out a way to turn it upside down and make it mean exactly opposite of what you intended it to be. And that's exactly what they did with the First Amendment. They exactly turned it upside down. In fact, Alexander Hamilton even gave that as an example in the Federalist Papers in promoting the Constitution. He gave the First Amendment as an example of how someday the federal government would flip it on its head. And they did. They did exactly that. They flipped it on its head. So anyway, that's all that. We're past time. So I just want to get that stuff because we're talking about an important subject of how government controls media and government control free speech and so forth. And it is a vitally important topic. And of course, you know my biases, that I'm very free speech, even if I think most of the media are controlled by liberals. I don't want government to do anything about it. Even if I think Facebook is trying to prejudice things against the conservatives, I don't want the government to do anything about it. I just want government to stay out of it, because government will always look after its own best interest. Government, politicians and government will always look after their own best interest if you don't stop them. And so that was the whole intention of the Constitution, was to stop politicians from looking out for their own best interests, whether it's biasing the election process, whether it's stopping free speech, anything. You have to repress the government. You don't have to repress the people. You have to repress the government. Get the government out of it, because they will take advantage of it, and they will try to do things with that power of government to repress you if you don't repress them. That was the total intention of the Constitution. That has, in many aspects, been flipped on its head by the Supreme Court, primarily. So, okay, well, thank you. I will, like I said, make another short video tonight, reviewing some more of the things. If you want a copy of your color-coded paper, send me a request, so I can just hit respond or reply and send it back to you. Okay? Okay, thank you.